Hello, everyone. Welcome back to WYTV7 Christian Broadcast. You are in the gap with your host, Keith Smith. And I'm glad to have you guys today, and we're going to dive right in to our segment because I got a lot of information, and I want to try to get it all in the time frame. If you know me by now, you know I love to tell stories. Today, I'm going to tell another story because I got 1,000 stories I could tell in just about any situation. But this is not going to be a story about a talking dog or one that can race. This is actually a true story. It actually happened to me. And it's one that my dad and we shared together. When I was in high school, I would come home after school before practices and stuff, and I would watch TV a little bit. And my dad would still be working. He was an investigator with the sheriff's department. So a lot of times he wouldn't get home till late at night. Well, when I would come home from school, I would eat and watch some TV. Well, one of the things that my dad and I enjoyed doing together at night was he loved to watch Jeopardy. That was like his favorite game show to watch. And when he would come home after he would get his dinner and all, he would sit in the living room and watch Jeopardy. So by that time my day was over, I would come in and sit with him. So we would watch Jeopardy together. And then, one night, I started answering all the questions. And as soon as he was asking them, I was answering. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. Albert Einstein, E equals MC squared, Paris, France, it didn't matter. Geometry, whatever it was. And those are pretty hard questions. So I remember my dad kind of looking over there at me and saying, son, if you can answer all these things, you ought to be bringing home a little better grades than what you're doing. They're not bad, but you could be doing a whole lot better. Well, not consistently after that, I started answering those questions to a fashion that it started amazing my dad. So he had started going back to work at the sheriff's office telling people, man, my son is a genius. He can answer all this stuff on Jeopardy. He can answer them even before some of the champions on there answer the questions. It's amazing at what he can do. Well, what my dad did not know was this. When I came home from school at 4 o'clock while he was still out working on cases, that same Jeopardy show that played that night would air earlier around 4 or 4:30. I couldn't remember the time. But I would actually get to watch most of it before I'd have to go to practice. So what I would do is watch it and memorize the answers to sit with my dad later on and start blurting them out, because I have a pretty good memory. I can recall things. So I said, when I came home, that's all I did. When it would just start triggering the answers in my mind, and I could answer most of them. So I continued doing that day after day for a while. And then one day I came home from school. And when I walked in, I walked right past my dad's car. He wasn't feeling well that day, and he came home a little early. So it still didn't dawn on me, or I didn't pay much attention to it. When I walked into the living room, and the first thing I seen was my dad sitting on the sofa watching Jeopardy. And I'll never forget this. That same way he turned his head and cocked his eye at me when it amazed him about all those answers, that he figured out that I was watching it beforehand and then giving the answers later on. I remember him looking at me and said, boy, you think you slick, don't you? He said, here I am telling everybody you're a genius, how smart you are. And come to find out you're a regular old dummy. Well, I'll tell you that story to tell you this, and it's something that's also in the Bible. It's in the Bible in Luke 8, chapter 8, verse 17. It starts talking about there's nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, or there's nothing concealed that won't be brought back out into the open. There's another term we use that everyone could probably be familiar with. Whatever you do in the darkness will eventually come to light. Well, just like with my situation with Jeopardy, yes, I got away with it day after day after day, but eventually it caught up with me. Well, there's something else we're going to talk about today that follows along those same lines, but it runs into a different area. And it's something, I don't care who you are, where you're from, I don't care what you've done with your life, or what kind of grades you make, or anything, your geographical location. Everyone will be faced with this. You may not be faced with it today. You may not be faced with it tomorrow, next year, but eventually everyone is going to be faced with this. It's adversity. You cannot escape adversity. The same way I was getting away with fooling my dad, eventually it caught up to me. Well, adversity is the same way. You may not experience it for a great portion of your life, but sooner or later, you will experience adversity. And the question is, how will you respond in this adversity? Now, let's understand, some adversity we go through is by our own voluntary self. We make choices that put us in these situations of adversity. In my life, if you've been following my stories through the previous broadcast, you understand I made some very poor choices that brought adversity upon me in several different ways. But we can also have adversity come in our life involuntarily as well, which means you didn't have a part in it. It came to you and you didn't do anything to warrant this. Well, still, you got to respond to this. And I think about one of my best friends of my whole life. His name was Gary Quick, and I used to call him Little G. And we used to hang out all the time, play ball together, everything. Grew up in the same town. Well, one night, it was on a Labor Day Monday. He had called me that night and asked me to come out to a little sports bar that we used to go to in that area, but I couldn't. I had a young family at home. I had to work the next day. He was going to be off. So I just told him, I said, "No, not tonight." He said, "Well, I'm going to come by your house and stay tonight once I leave from here." I said, "Okay, I'll leave the door open for you." And I left him a blanket and a pillow on the couch, and for him to sleep downstairs because I would be upstairs with my family. And when I got up for work the next morning, the blanket and the pillow was still in the same spot. I went to the door and the door had stayed unlocked all night. I looked out in my yard and his car was not there. So I went ahead and got myself together for the next day's work. And when I went to get gas at one of the service stations we all go to in our town, I hear the news. He had been in a wreck. And he was in one of the major hospitals in our area, and it wasn't good. So I immediately went to the hospital, and I found out that they said that he was alive, but the wreck had actually broken his neck and some vertebrae, and he was going to be paralyzed from the neck down. And he was having surgery at the time. So when they brought him out of surgery and recovering later that afternoon, we all got to go in and see him. And I'll never forget, he still looked like the same person, but he was facing some adversity that he had never faced in his life. Now, yes, he made those choices, and some of his adversity was involuntary, but some of it was by choice. So he got a mixture of both. And for little Gary, the biggest thing I remember about his whole situation until he passed away some years later, he faced this adversity and he never complained. That was the biggest thing that stood out to me. He never complained. I watched him pray and give his life to God, even though I wasn't a follower of Christ at the time. I knew about him, but I watched him give his life to Christ, and he never wavered from that point. He never complained about his situation. He never complained about being in that wheelchair for the rest of his life, even after that. I remember right before his death one time, he told me, he said, "Keith, if I got to serve God from this wheelchair, I'll continue doing it." And he didn't just have the right attitude and the right passion for facing his adversity. He even went on to start telling his testimony at places and speaking out against drinking and driving. And he would put out these gospel tracts. He had his own little ministry from it. So one thing that I learned from him is how he faced his adversity was one thing that really helped me whenever I started going through adversity years later. I remember how little Gary faced it. So I tried to face my situation the same way he did. And there are several different ways we can face these adversities. And the first thing, and there's so many points we can bring out. I'm only going to bring out a couple, but a couple that I think are major contributors to helping recover from adversity and help anyone in these situations. The first thing was, like little Gary, he would accept it. He said, it's here, I'm in it, I don't care how it got here, I got to face it. Well, the same thing with me when I was faced with my adversity of incarceration. I had to quit worrying about what I did to put me in that situation and figure out how am I going to face it from here on. And little Gary was a great example to me how to start doing those things. So I would start thinking about how he faced things on a daily basis, and I started facing it. One was my choice of attitude. His choice of attitude was a good attitude in a bad situation. And even with that, you know, even being in prison, you know, I had to start facing what I could control at that time during the adversity and having a good attitude in a very bad situation. And that's kind of hard to do sometimes. And I put out a video one time on my personal page. It was about the area of influence versus your area of concern. And what that means is if you hold your arms out and make a complete circle, that imaginary circle, that's the dividing line between the area of influence and the area of concern. Anything inside that circle that you can touch physically or step to, you can influence that mentally, physically, spiritually, in so many different ways. But anything beyond that circle is your area of concern. Well, it means you're concerned about it, but you can't let your area of concern influence or change your area of influence inside of what you can. So I had to learn inside of those walls, I had to just be concerned with what I could control and not live beyond that. And that was a big help to me, and I learned that through Gary's adversity. He taught me that, not by word, but by deed, by how he faced it. And that helped me. And then this morning, I'm on Facebook, and I got a Facebook friend. His name is Brian Mance. And I want to tell you a little bit about Brian because he is very inspiring to me. I followed Brian when he was in high school years and years ago. He was played at Manning High School here in South Carolina. He was a defensive back. He was not only one of the best players in the state, but in the whole country. And a lot of big-time schools had come after Brian. Well, Brian, he went on to Clemson University and was a great defensive back for Clemson. After he graduated, he tried the NFL. He didn't really catch on. I think he got tryouts with the Redskins and the Bears. But Brian, when one avenue through his talent that God had made room for him, like it says, your gift will make room for you and bring you before great men in Proverbs 18. Brian did the same thing. His gift was closed off in the athletic part, but he stayed working with his talents. He got into coaching. He even got on Clemson staff as a GA, I think, a graduate assistant. But he went on to go to Wofford College in Spartanburg, where he was the defensive back coach. So now he's using his talents to move in a different arena, and wham, adversity hits him. Brian was about 6'1", about 200 pounds, maybe 210, 220. Physical specimen of a man. And he was attacked with a disease. And I'm going to try to say the disease the best I can. It's a long word. And anything past refrigerator, I have trouble with sometimes. So it's neurosarcoidosis, I think it is. But what it is an autoimmune disease that will attack the mobility of your arms and legs. Now, Brian did nothing in this to warrant this adversity to come in his life. And it wasn't by his choice, and it wasn't voluntary. There was nothing he could do about it, but he was faced with it anyway. And Brian, he puts out videos on Facebook that are so inspiring, and I watch them all. They're very quick hitters. He's also on YouTube, but it's called #Brian's Journey. And if you get a chance, look these up, man. This kid he's very inspiring in this situation he's in. But Brian puts out little things that kind of help people through this adversity. And the title of his videos has adversity in it, you know. So when I start thinking about how we should face adversity, I think about little Gary, but I also think about Brian Mance, because he's putting out a really good blueprint for how to face some of these things. And remember, mine was by choice. Brian's is involuntary. You know, I also think about Job when I think about Brian, you know, because the Bible says in the book of Job that he did nothing to warrant these things, that this adversity that was coming into his life. I mean, it said that he was a faithful and upright and just man before God. And he didn't do anything wrong to be placed in this adversity. But if you know Job's situation, he lost everything from his family, his kids, to all of his wealth, to everything, and did nothing. Even when other people were telling him, surely there was something you did, he did nothing. So we don't have a choice of, if adversity strikes, we have to sit and wait and say, when is it going to strike? Because sooner or later, it's going to strike everyone. Well, the thing that I have come to respect about Brian is he's putting these videos out and he's journaling his journey. That's the hashtag Brian's journey. But the thing that I'm getting from Brian more than anything is not his journey with this disease. It's about his attitude in the midst of this adversity. So when I look at Brian's videos, I don't see him documenting or do a documentary about this rare disease. I see Brian documenting his victory in this situation. That's what's so inspiring to me. Brian is documenting already his victory. One thing that he said today is something I had to live in the midst of my adversity, and it was this. He said when he first started his recovery and working with the therapist, that he had to, you know, it was a big goal to try to regain mobility, and it just seemed insurmountable to be faced with something this huge when you can't move anything. But what he did was, instead of just saying, you know, what am I going to do? I can't move anything. He took his complete focus and he started putting it on one hand. And he started working with this one hand, constantly forgetting everything else and putting his focus on that. And he said once he started regaining mobility in that hand, he moved to the other hand. Now he's moving his arms up. And you can see this in his journey. And that was so weird, because when I was in the midst of my incarceration, I read something that helped me along those same lines. It was where a man was telling his life story, and this was the simple phrase that he made. He said, life is easier when you break it down into its simplest form. That means focusing on one thing at a time. Well, for me, the only thing I could focus on is they're going to have several counts in prison. Every day, they're going to know where you're at. My count time was every 2 hours. So my life was spent focusing on what I could do in this 2-hour span to be productive and to help move me past my adversity. And then after that count time, I would only focus on what I can control in this next 2 hours. And just like Brian was illustrating, and this guy in this book that I read, Monty Lewis was his name, they were right. It makes things simpler for us to digest. So these huge goals like Brian was talking about, they look doable when you break them down into doing one task at a time and then moving forward that way. Then when you look back over these small achievements and small goals that we've conquered in this adversity, it looks like some huge feat, where in actuality we did them in such small increments that we were able to overcome these things and amass a big goal with it. Well, I thank Brian for doing that, and I look forward to seeing some more of his videos, because it inspires me as well. And these things can be translated into several different things in life. And I can't think about how Brian is facing his situation or how I had to face mine, or little Gary, or so many other people out there that has overcome adversity, who has took that adversity, put it in their back pocket and said, I can't do anything about it, but what I'm going to do is start living through this adversity. Well, I can't move on without thinking about Paul. Now, I want to recap what I just said about, first, you got to accept that it's here and there's nothing you can do about it. Your choice of attitude in that, and learning to break things down into smaller goals so you can achieve it in this adversity. Well, Paul encompassed all of that. Paul, and I love the story of Paul in the Bible. You know, he was the greatest missionary of all time. And he wrote so many books of the New Testament. I mean, it's amazing how many books he wrote in the New Testament. But I can remember in Acts, and it's Acts 16, where Paul and Silas are in prison. And when it says that they were cast into prison for preaching the gospel, what they believed. Now, they were just doing what they believed in doing with all their heart. And they were cast into prison. They were beaten. It said that some of the people had even turned on them. And they didn't just put them in the prison. It said they put them in the inner prison and put their feet in the stocks. Well, it's bad enough just being in prison. Take my word for it. But in this prison, it was kind of a circular prison. And the inner prison was in the middle. And it was completely dark. And they was inside of this with all kind of cells around them. They couldn't see anyone. They could hear people. And their feet were in the stocks. And they couldn't move. They were sore from being beat on. They had open wounds and open sores on them from these beatings. Now, they were facing some of the worst adversity of their life. But how did they face it? They put their focus on what they could control. Even being in that inner prison, in that small part of a very bad place, not being able to see, not being able to move. The Bible says they responded by singing hymns of praise so the other prisoners could hear them. They were saying, our situation's bad, it's here. But I'm more concerned when I can't help my own life right now, is helping the other lives around me. They focused on it so much in that moment that an earthquake came, shook the prison, opened the stocks up for them. And if you continue reading, you see how they even kept the jailer from committing suicide, where he was about to kill himself, thinking they had all run off and the leaders were having him killed anyway. He said, don't do that. We're all here. And the same man that helped put the stripes on them, carried them home and cleaned those things, fed them, took care of them, cleaned the wounds out, and him and his old family were saved. Our attitude in adversity is not only to help us, it's to help other people. Same way little Gary's attitude helped me in mine. The same way that I'm looking at Brian chronicling his adversity is helping not only me and others in different adverse situations. You know, I think about that. What can we do in our adversity to show other people how to respond? I was lucky. I had a good teacher in little Gary that helped me. That's great. I thank God for that. And also think about Paul in another time. Paul spent more time in prison. I'm telling you, Paul did some time. And he was in prison at another time. And he's talking about it in the letter to Philippians, that all the palace guards, you know, they know who his faith and belief is in, Jesus Christ, because they hear it all the time. I've heard somebody preach on it before, and they said every 8 hours they changed guards and was chained up to Paul. I heard one preach that said theologians say it was every 6 hours, but it didn't matter. All Paul was concerned with in this adverse situation and another worst time of his life was, man, I got 3 to 4 people every day different that I can preach Jesus Christ to. He looked beyond his adversity, beyond his situation, He used what God gave him inside of that situation to help him get out of it. I said, wow, that's a lesson to all of us. How do we look past our adversity? The way we do that is the attitude we develop inside of that. Paul could do that easily, even though from the outside it looked very hard. But Paul did it easily because Paul knew what a relationship with Jesus Christ was like. Even after I witnessed little Gary give his life to Christ, and I watched God start moving in his life, and I seen it all unfold in front of me, still, it was years and years later before I made that commitment. And I sit back now and I wonder what took me so long. You know, and I think Paul, in the midst of everything that he was going through, even to the fact that he said, you know, I know a lot of people are preaching Jesus Christ. Some are doing it for their own ambition. Some are doing it to make my troubles even worse. You know, some doing it just to be selfish. He said, but whatever reason that Christ is being preached. Well, I think the 3 points that I've given you, and I'm sure you guys can come up with your own points, will also show you that, hey, accepting that it's here, having a choice of a good attitude in it, and focusing on breaking things down into the smaller steps. These are all really good things to help you recover from it. But I'm telling you from personal experience, the biggest reason I could overcome was Jesus Christ. Because without him, I would have never been able to accept the things that happened to me. Without him, I would have never been able to have the right attitude. Because I was a person, I was kind of a selfish person. But when I found myself in that situation and I started having to focus on just what I could control, it was Christ within me that started saying, helping me say, what can I do to lighten other people's loads back here in the same situation? What can I do to bring some joy into their life? Because I never would have thought about that on my own. And I heard T.D. Jakes talk about this third one too before. He said, there's purity in simplicity. Even if you're not in an adverse situation or facing one of the biggest crises of your life, we can all benefit from that as well. Break things down into smaller increments. They're more manageable that way. We don't get overwhelmed. Then we don't let our areas of concern start affecting our area of influence. Because once we tackle one small task, we can do another, and then another, and then another. So I think those are 3 very good points. But the best point of all is allowing Jesus Christ to be your guide through these things. When you accept him into your life, and trust me, it took me to be in the worst adversity of my life before I said, just like last broadcast, I talked about it, I tap out for it. You got me in a submission hold now. I'm listening. I understand you have a work for me to do. Let's do it. Before I could get that attitude, I had to be in the worst situation of my life. Well, even with that, being in the worst situation of my life, I had to come to a breaking point to say, I need a relationship with Jesus Christ. And it may not take it for you, to be in the worst situation of your life. I remember speaking one time and a lady said, well, I know a lot of people that go to prison and they find Jesus, but when they get out, all of them don't follow. And that is true. It's a choice. But my response to her was, a lot of people call it jailhouse religion or prison religion when that happens. But my response to her was this: I've never known anyone to go to Jesus Christ because everything was going right in their life. Usually, it's going to have to be something really wrong. And today, even if there's nothing wrong in your life, and I just might not be where I need to be with Christ, you can still make that same commitment. And even if you're facing one of the toughest crises of your life, you really need to make that commitment today. 1 John 1:9, I say it every broadcast. If we confess our sins to Christ, he is quick and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And if you have not done that, and you would like to do that, please say that prayer. Say, Lord, I'm a sinner. Come into my life. Lead me, guide me. Help me through these things. Just talk to him like you talk to a regular friend, because he said he is our friend. And ask him to come in and take control of your life, forgive your sins, cleanse you from all unrighteousness, accept what you've done wrong, and know that it's time to change. And start following him and see your life take off. That'll be the best point of change in any adverse situation you can ever make. And I hope today I was a help to you guys in sharing some of my life and Brian's life and little Gary's life with you. I hope that it helped someone out there. And if it did, please contact us at WYTV7 or at our website, inthegapmotivational.com. All my contact information is there. You can reach us there as well. I'd love to hear from you. And if you would like to book me to come speak somewhere, please contact us. Let us know. We can get it worked out. But also, too, something else that'll help a lot will be if you'll go to WYTV7, if you'll go to that, it's WYTV7.org, and they have a page and they have a donate button. If you could help by donating to WYTV7, they can continue to bring messages like on my broadcast or all the other broadcasters who's doing a great job to you guys to help people that may be facing these adverse situations. We need your help just as bad as there are people out there that need our help, but our messages are stored. So I'm going to ask you to help as well. Guys, this has been a pleasure. I can't wait the next episode. I enjoyed coming on here every week, and I'm looking forward to bringing you something great next time. But until then, we will be standing in the gap for you. Please go stand in the gap for someone else who can't stand for themselves. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.